This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of people with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 442, Mercury Editor. This episode of Talking Drupal is sponsored by Hero Devs. On today's show, we're talking about Mercury Editor, what it does, and how it could change your editorial life with our guest, Justin Tupin. We'll also cover web form protected downloads as our module of the week. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Today, our guest is Justin Tupin. Justin is the founder and CEO of Atten Design Group, a digital strategy, design, and development agency. Since 2000, Atten has been working with .org, .gov, and .edu clients to plan, design, and build and support digital products, websites, and web applications. Justin has been working with Drupal since way back in 2006 with version 4.7. Yes, another 4.7er. And is the maintainer of a number of modules on Drupal.org, including our topic today, Mercury Editor, which is a visual page building solution focused on the needs of marketers and editorial staff. Justin, welcome back to the show, and thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, John. Great to be here.
I am John Picozzi, Solutions Architect at EPAM, and today my co-hosts are joining us for the second time, Anna Mihailova, Director of Technology at Kalamuna, and Nick Laughlin, Founder at Enlightened Development.
Good morning. Happy to be here. Looking forward to hearing about Mercury Editor. This might be one of the most the longest since we teased it, because I think when you were on the show last time, you briefly talked about Mercury Editor and said we'd have a show on it, and that was about 100 episodes ago. So it's good to have you.
Has it been that long? Come on.
Episode 337.
Wow. Okay.
How long does that make it, Nick?
About 2 years. We release about once a week.
Wow.
But before we talk about Mercury Editor, let's turn it over to Martin Anderson-Klutz, a senior solutions engineer at Acquia and a maintainer of a number of Drupal modules of his own, to talk about our module of the week this week. Martin, what do you have for us?
Thanks, John. Have you ever wanted to have downloadable content on your website only available to visitors who have filled out a web form? There's a module for that. It's called Web Form Protected Downloads, and it was originally created in September 2010 by username Berliner, but the most recent releases are by James Williams of Computer Minds. Now, the versions available are 7.x-1.1 and 8.x-1.0-alpha 2 versions, the latter of which works with Drupal 9 and 10. It is actively maintained. In fact, that latest release was just a week ago. Has a security coverage, and it doesn't technically have documentation, but the project page does have a link to an introductory blog post for that Drupal 9 ready version. It currently has 18 open issues, none of which are bugs against the current branch, which is great considering that the module is in use by 804 sites. Now, having thought leadership content like white papers or reports gated behind a lead capture form is a pretty common pattern for websites. And this module is designed to make that very easy to set up. You use the module by adding a handler to your web form, similar to triggering an email send. In the configuration for your web form, protected download handler, you have options for how much verification you want for the download link, whether or not the link should expire after a period of time, and so on, in addition to uploading one or more files that can be downloaded by people who have submitted the form. Module also provides tokens for the download URLs so that you can easily include them in a submission confirmation message or an email that would be sent directly to the user. So let's talk about web form protected downloads.
I feel like all the marketers that listen to our podcast just got real excited because like the first use case that comes to mind for this is like, man, those white papers that people have to fill out forms for, like this is it right here.
Yeah, it seems like a solution. I mean, personally, as a user, I hate being asked for my email when I want to download something.
Well, yeah, nobody likes gated content, Nick.
But there's a use case for it sometimes, and this from a site builder side, looks like it makes it very easy, which is nice.
Yeah, the first ever Drupal website I built for a customer, this was a requirement that they added just before launch. And so a lot of custom code had to be written, again, way back in Drupal 4.7, but it's pretty cool now that this is something that you can drop in pretty easily.
Martin, you may have mentioned this, and I might have missed it, but I'm just wondering, does it like cookie you? Like, so if you filled out the form and then left and came back, like, or do you just get a link to the download in your email?
I believe there are sort of configuration options. So I think I would have to double check the product page, but I think you can set sort of a cookie, or you can just have the link as something that can be shared. And then, you can have it expire after a period of time. So you can say whoever visits the link for the next hour can use it, or maybe you say only the person who filled out that web form can actually use that link.
Got it.
Yeah. And that probably relies on a lot of the built-in web form stuff. Like if you allow anonymous web form, you can like use IP and a cookie to determine if somebody's filled it out before. But if they have an account, like it just knows if somebody's filled out the form. Although if this is for white papers and stuff, people probably won't have an account.
All right. Well, this is very exciting, and I can't wait to put some gated content on my website. Martin, thank you as usual. If folks wanted to connect with you or suggest a module of the week, how could they go about doing that?
We are always happy to receive nominations for Module of the Week in the Talking Drupal channel of Drupal Slack, but they can also connect to me directly via all of the Drupal or social channels as @manclue.
Perfect. Thanks so much. This episode of Talking Drupal is sponsored by Hero Devs. Let's talk about life after Drupal 7 end of life. Since August 2023, there has been a lot of discussion around Drupal 7's official end of life in January 2025. It's no secret that many companies, organizations, and individuals are still on Drupal 7 and have yet to migrate. I think we can all agree that migration, while beneficial, is not always feasible. This is where Hero Devs comes in. Hero Devs has partnered with core team maintainers of Drupal 7 to build and maintain their Drupal 7 never-ending support product, ensuring the same quality of support you have come to expect over the years. Drupal 7 never-ending support, or NES, allows for an effortless transition, allowing your site to remain secure, compliant, and compatible after Drupal 7 goes end of life. This allows you to migrate on your own timeline, or potentially not at all. Hero Devs promises to keep D7 alive and well, even offering support for the current top 100 Drupal 7 modules. If you'd like to know more about Drupal 7 never-ending support, visit herodevs.com. That's HERODEVS.com. All right, let's jump into our primary topic, which is Mercury Editor. Justin, this first one might be a bit of a softball for you, but I feel like people that are coming into this may not necessarily know what Mercury Editor is. So can you tell us a little bit about Mercury Editor? What is it?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Thanks, John. So Mercury Editor, I guess, first and foremost, it's just worth saying Mercury Editor is a module. It's a Drupal module. It's available on Drupal.org. The project page is drupal.org/project/Mercury_editor. Mercury Editor essentially takes over the content creation and edit forms in Drupal. And it provides a new UI for both creating and editing content. The kind of biggest piece of that is Mercury pushes the edit form into a tray on the side. You can think of this as kind of an off-canvas dialogue, a custom off-canvas dialogue, when there's a live preview on the left-hand side. And on top of that live preview, if you're using layout paragraphs in the paragraphs module, which we'll get into more here in a minute, it provides component-based, highly visual drag and drop editing. So completely focused on the needs of editorial staff and marketers. Lets editors easily choose from a menu of available component types, drop those components right into the live preview, move them around, edit them, etc. That's it sort of in a quick nutshell. I know we'll get kind of more into some of the features of Mercury as we progress here.
Question on the live preview. Is it using kind of the live preview functionality that's kind of being worked on in the community right now, or did you guys develop kind of your own live preview?
No, we developed our own, and I think when we started working on this, at least to my knowledge, that initiative had not started yet in the community.
It's
So
relatively new, so that kind of makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah. And to be honest, I'm not super familiar even with kind of what's happening in core with the live preview and how that's
Yep.
working. For Mercury, we're using an iframe, and then have some interesting stuff happening behind the scenes with how Ajax commands are passed back and forth between the parent window and the iframe window. So basically means that as you're editing content, either through the edit form on the right-hand side, or again, if you're using layout paragraphs, which provides like a kind of a drag and drop interface for paragraphs, all of that is happening in real time on the preview. So you can really easily just see a very clear representation of what you're working on.
Very
Yeah, I
cool.
think I'll be interested to see how you integrate the same page preview stuff once it gets into core. But my understanding is that same page preview kind of inverts that. It puts the preview in the Slido tray and leaves the editorial in the same place. But I think there's still
Interesting.
value add to what you do. You know, aside from inverting it, you know, the ability to interact with the content kind of in a to
So
interact with the content and drop things is interesting.
I have a question too about the live preview. I think a hot topic here. Basically, are you micro saving it somewhere, like in a storage, in a cookie, or is it just temporary? Like, are those Ajax command interacts at all with the database, or is that just all kind of on the fly with JavaScript and some libraries?
Yeah, and that's a great question. The way that's working, it's using private temp stores. So it's using the private temp store service, and it's using a custom private temp store service to save, essentially to save work in progress on the parent, kind of the very highest level entity, as you're interacting or as you're editing the content. And then when you hit the save button, only when you hit the save button does it actually use permanent storage, meaning just
Oh.
actually runs the entity save. So then when you hit save, it collects all of the data that you've been working on, and it's been registered to the temp store, and saves that up to the entity.
And that's because you allow people to interact with the preview page, I imagine, right? Because I remember asking that question about the same page preview, and they just use form state, but you can't do that because you're interacting with the preview directly sometimes, right?
Yeah, exactly. Through Mercury, one of the benefits and challenges from a technical perspective is there are multiple ways to interact with the node that's being edited. So you can interact with it from the live preview, you can interact with it from the form. The live preview itself, you can have, you know, a layout paragraphs field, and then layout paragraphs field within the layout paragraphs field.
Yep.
Where we're headed, we'll talk more about roadmap, I know, but where we're headed is allowing users to edit, to directly inline edit text content, plain text content, and other fields. So it's a lot of data that has to be passed back and forth related to that node, and then stored in some way, you know, in preparation for saving to the database.
Okay.
Are there any limitations of amount of components? I know on some websites that use layout builder, like big pages, loads of components, or even use paragraphs within layout builder, put like paragraphs within paragraphs, and then inside layout builder, then sometimes you run out of memory, or you run out of amount of entities that can be referenced by that node. Are there any limitations in Mercury editor of like how many components and things you can nest in there?
Yeah, another great question. None that I know of. And I think the main caveat that I would use there, so the last time I was on the show, actually, we talked about layout paragraphs, which is a
Yep.
way for, it provides kind of a visual interface in the edit form in Drupal for dragging and dropping paragraphs and nesting them within layouts. Mercury editor is, maybe you could think of it as kind of most powerful. It works, it doesn't rely on layout paragraphs directly, but it fits kind of hand in glove in terms of the best experiences when you're using Mercury editor with layout paragraphs enabled. One of the kind of fundamental ideas behind layout paragraphs was to get away from nested paragraphs. So layout paragraphs, you know, you have sections, within sections you have regions, within regions you have other paragraphs. but all of that is actually stored in a single flat reference field, a single list of paragraphs. The value of that, or a single list of entities or components, all of those words, somewhat interchangeable in this context. The value of that is you don't run into that kind of classic problem of building a site on nested entity, reference, revision fields, which can become really pose real performance problems, real scalability problems. So we get away from that by using layout paragraphs, which stores everything as a flat list, and then just like builds up that layout using data actually on the list. Does that make sense? I know it's a little hard to, it's quite abstract talking about it.
No, it makes sense. I actually have a follow-up, if that's okay. Revisions, as you know, as you just mentioned, is a huge problem specifically for performance and management of orphan revisions when, let's say, a parent node was deleted, paragraph stayed in there. I think there were a couple issues active. I don't know if they were resolved on the paragraphs module. How does Mercury editor handle the revisions? And like, can I revert everything? Are my other components, being also revisioned? And can I kind of adjacent to that, can I reuse some of the components across multiple nodes, and are those revisions as well?
Those two really awesome questions. So first of all, one of the ideas behind Mercury is to, as much as possible, use underlying existing functionality for storage and for editing content. So Mercury provides this UI on top of existing storage, on top of existing APIs. So Mercury does nothing specific or nothing different with respect to revisions. That's all just handled by the paragraphs module, by the underlying paragraphs module. So any of the, the good part of that, the plus on that, is that anything that's working well in paragraphs works well, and then the downside obviously is it doesn't do anything to fix any challenges that already exist with revisions. I think one of the biggest challenges with revisions is nested paragraph structures. So as much as possible, we avoid that. We try to not nest paragraphs. We just use a single paragraph reference field, use layout paragraphs to manage what looks like nested paragraphs, but in reality, it's all just a flat list. And that helps with respect to revisionable content. As far as reusing components, there are a couple ways of doing that. One, layout paragraphs does have an integration with the paragraph library module. So you can use the paragraph library module from layout paragraphs, which means you can also use it in Mercury editor. To be honest, I've never actually even personally tried that, but that does exist in layout paragraphs. What that allows you to do is save a paragraph to the library and then reuse it elsewhere in the site. When you're saving paragraphs to a library and reusing it elsewhere, it's important to keep in mind that you're literally reusing the exact same content. So if you go back to the library and make changes to it, it changes everywhere. There's a bunch of other ways that you can do that. Block reference fields, view reference fields, entity reference fields. And if you're using paragraphs and layout paragraphs, all of those fields would have to be attached to a paragraph type. So it kind of starts with the paragraph, and then you have the reference field below it. Something else that is available as a submodule of Mercury Editor, so this is specific to Mercury Editor, is this concept of templating, and the ability to turn, when you turn on the Mercury Editor templates module, you can then click a stamp button on any section that you're working with. So you create a section, maybe you have 2 columns, start adding content on the left, some media on the right, hit the stamp button on the section. It pulls up a dialog. You can name your template. And then when you click the plus button to add another component into the page, it appears in the list, whatever you named it as.
Oh, wow.
And if you go that route, that's true templating. That's not a library. So in that sense, it's just reusing that template, copying the template as a starting point. And if you edit that content, it does not affect it elsewhere on the site. So those are a few ways that we're kind of dealing with that whole idea of reusable content.
Interesting.
That's pretty awesome. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah.
Good.
I was just going to say the stamp feature it's kind of awesome. I mean, when you build like a complex layout and then hit the stamp and it just saves to the component library, that's definitely, there are a few features that have really stood out as like kind of the lights come on when you do a demo and people are like, whoa, this could be really powerful for my organization. And that templating piece is definitely one of them.
Okay, I'll have to check that out. So we kind of answered my next question already, which is what powers Mercury Editor from the Drupal side, which is it sounds like paragraphs and paragraph layouts is the primary thing. But I kind of have a follow up because um, I'm super familiar with paragraphs, used it everywhere. I have also recently been starting to use another module called storage, which has it kind of has the best of both worlds of paragraphs and using just a normal node entity for shareable content. You know, it doesn't use I find that a lot of, and this isn't specific to this module, but I found a lot of the problems, like Anna said, with paragraphs ends up with nesting and entity reference revisions, right? When you have lots of revisions, things get weird, but storage implements the entity a little bit different. So I kind of, it makes it reusable a little bit easier, more natively. It gives you a list of all the storage entities on the site. There's a lot of nice things about it. Is Mercury Editor able to switch out what it's using in the back end, or is it tightly coupled with paragraphs? And if you don't use paragraphs, Mercury Editor won't do anything.
Yeah, good question. So I would say Mercury Editor is not tightly coupled to paragraphs, but for the live edit, like actually editing the preview, that capability, there is a lot of functionality that's built on top of paragraphs. Part of the vision for Mercury is that we begin extending that same functionality to other field data and entity types. You can imagine, so backing up to something even simpler, if you have, say, a blog post and the blog post has a body field, adding the ability to Mercury to just click on that body field in the live preview, start adding your content or editing your content. That's something that we're already working on, and that's something that's actually already working in the context of a paragraph nested within the node. But now we're working on bringing that back out to some of those like higher level fields, and then that would apply also to things like I'm actually not familiar at all with the storage module, but that presumably would apply the same way. Like the goal is to identify sort of the highest value field types and start extending that live edit in the context of the preview, that live edit functionality. And so far that's all been focused on paragraphs. But that's, again, extending that is something that we're excited to tackle. And that's something also, I mean, it'll be interesting to see as Mercury gets more community adoption, it'll be interesting to see what other folks in the community kind of bring to it in terms of that.
Nice. Do you see any risks using paragraphs instead of Layout Builder as a kind of a primary code base for Mercury Editor, or a foundation?
Not really. I mean, the main risk is the obvious one, that it's contrib and not core. So Mercury is built on something that's in contrib. At face value, what that means is there's a little bit less certainty about the future of that ecosystem. That said, I don't actually think there's much uncertainty about the future of the paragraphs ecosystem or about the viability or adoption of paragraphs. It's still incredibly widely used. Virtually everyone I talk to in the Drupal world either uses paragraphs or has used paragraphs in the past. But certainly the fact that it's in contrib makes it a little bit less certain than if we were building this on top of something that's in core. With respect to Layout Builder, I think I probably said something like this the last time when I was talking about layout paragraphs. Layout Builder, so my team uses Layout Builder fairly extensively for site building, for placing blocks in a layout across the site and then making customizations on in particular contexts. What seems more challenging about Layout Builder is using it as a marketing and editorial tool. And it's so powerful, and it exposes everything to the interface. And I know of course, there are modules for limiting what's available to end users, but as opposed to being, focused first on the context of your piece of content and associated fields and sub-entities, et cetera, it's really focused more on like the whole framework of the site and what everything is available in the site. For that reason, it just didn't seem as well suited. The way Layout Builder stores references to custom blocks, and there's a number of other things that we liked for the same reasons that other folks in the community like working with paragraphs. It's already what we were using as an agency to kind of give our clients the ability to create really flexible, to kind of compose really flexible types of content. So for all those reasons, we went the paragraphs route. I don't see risk there. I do see opportunity for continuing to adopt other entity types, relationship types, et cetera, and kind of bringing that into the Mercury editor live preview piece.
Well, I'm curious, and this might actually be more to paragraph layouts than Mercury editor, but related to the layout builder question, I think there's two big drawbacks to layout builder. One of them you already highlighted, which is, it kind of exposes too much to the end users without like some customization. I mean, that's Drupal in a nutshell, I guess. I mean, that's why we love it, but it takes a lot of effort. One of the other things that always makes me hesitate when we're talking about layout builder is that it removes the knowledge of the content on the page. Like, it serializes all the content. So like a lot of the stuff in views that you're used to just being able to get doesn't work. Translation, you have to make some strong assumptions when you're translating layout builder content. And once you make that decision, you're kind of locked in without significant effort. Does Mercury editor affect any of that kind of thing? Like if you're doing translations, or if you're doing some custom like views, pulling in content based on things that are in paragraphs on the content, do those relationships still work? Is it kind of like Drupal just sees it as a flat relationship, or is there some magic going on to map things?
Yeah, no magic as far as that goes. Nothing extra or special as far as those relationships go. Nick, that's one. In my view, that's one of the drawbacks also of Layout Builder, is just that it uses a different approach to storage from the more structured, maybe classic kind of entity and entity reference field route, which, as you said, gives you the ability to create views, create other kinds of dynamic lists of that content directly going to hitting entity storage and using the entity storage API. Mercury doesn't do anything different. It just uses the underlying. It uses what again, it's just using paragraphs directly. So nothing changes about storage. There's no serialized, blob field that has a bunch of JSON data or a bunch of custom tags or nothing like that. It's just providing a UI for managing those underlying, managing the underlying fields.
Okay.
Kind of feeling like I already know the answer to this question, but I'm assuming there's no plans to apply Mercury editor to like Layout Builder in the future, right? Like you're just gonna stay on focus, on topic with paragraphs.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's no plans at this point to do that. We have talked about and considered, the challenge, again, going back to what Nick just talked about. I really don't want to go the route of Mercury having any opinion or any influence on the way content is stored on behind the scenes. There may be a way to bring some of the Mercury UI to Layout Builder. That's not really on our radar right now. I think we would be much more interested in continuing, as I was saying before, continuing to look at those other field types and extending Mercury to work with other field types. Things as simple as like plain text and rich text fields, but also more complex fields, media reference fields. Nick, you mentioned the storage module again, which I'm not familiar with, but those kinds of like other fields that are adopting that kind of entity reference to entity model.
Yep.
One thing maybe worth noting also is we do use, as I said before, we use Layout Builder quite a bit. And we typically use Layout Builder to manage, again, like the layout of a site, the actual, what goes in the header, footer, sidebars, whatever the custom regions are. And Mercury and Layout Paragraphs both work within the context of Layout Builder. So you can set everything up with Layout Builder, have your node, render in the primary region using Layout Builder, and in that primary region, if it's showing a Layout Paragraphs field and you're using Mercury Editor, you'll be able to edit that content kind of down within the context of Layout Builder. So you're not like moving things around that are Layout Builder related. You're still working in that like Layout Paragraphs, that paragraph reference field, but it's all within the context of Layout Builder. It still works that way.
So it's more like a Layout Builder's handling the global layout, and Mercury Editor and Layout Paragraphs is handling kind of the local page specific layout sort of thing, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Does Mercury Editor work with other entity types then? So if I have a taxonomy, some sites taxonomies have complex fields, and like, can I use Mercury Editor to edit those as well, or is it just nodes?
Great question. And yes, you can. It does not work. So there is an underlying API for turning Mercury Editor on for other entity types. So you could provide, so out of the box, just to answer the question directly first, out of the box, Mercury supports editing nodes, editing taxonomy terms. So that is provided right out of the box. And also Mercury Editor provides can be used to edit Mercury Editor templates. So we're talking about templates a little bit ago. You can actually go into, once you've enabled that templates module, you can go into admin content. There will be a Mercury Editor templates tab within the admin content screen. Click on that tab. If you click add template, as long as you have Mercury Editor, the setting checked just to use Mercury Editor for Mercury Editor templates, you will be using the Mercury Editor live preview to edit those templates. So those are the three entity types supported out of the box. There's a series of steps that one would have to follow and you could just do this in a custom module, like have a custom module that allows you to edit your custom entity type, or maybe the user entity, or whatever you want to extend it to. There's a series of steps that you go through just to declare that that entity is available for editing in Mercury.
So you've already highlighted earlier on that Mercury Editor is a Drupal module. It's on Drupal.org. People can download it, install it, and use it at no cost to them, right? But I'm assuming that if I wanted to start using Mercury Editor and I wanted, the experts at Atten to help me implement it, you would be happy to do that. Or if I were already using it and I had a feature that I wanted to pay to have added in there, that Atten might take that work on. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, John. The short answer is yes, and we love doing that kind of work. And we're a consulting shop, and at the end of the day, that's what we're interested in, is consulting projects. And we do a lot of consulting work around Mercury, as you might imagine. Mercury first came about, backing up a little bit, the foundation for this, the predecessor for this, in terms of our focus, was definitely Layout Paragraphs. So first it was working with paragraphs, then thinking about like, how do we make paragraphs even more flexible and allow you to really nest paragraphs without some of the complexities that come along with that. Started building Layout Paragraphs, and Layout Paragraphs was used in virtually every client project we took on, and has been since we started working on that module. Really wanted to push that even further. That's kind of what the genesis of Mercury Editor was all about, is how do we make that experience even more seamless. And the Mercury Editor became, again, a part of virtually every project we take on. So most of our work is in redesign projects, kind of full service strategy design development. And Mercury Editor ends up being a part of almost all of the projects that we do. And it's worth saying, like, our team's development, my personal work is being driven by the needs of our clients, for sure. And like many other agencies, that's what's kind of supporting, or that's what's sponsoring that work. We do also provide consulting just to help organizations either install and make use of Mercury. We've had a few organizations reach out to us. This is really exciting to me, but we've had a few organizations reach out to us who have already adopted Mercury. I'm always amazed at how far folks have been able to push that. When we see what, often seeing what clients are achieving with Mercury on their own has just been really awesome. And we do quite a bit of consulting work, just engaging with those organizations to help them refine a feature, think through, component structure, stuff like that. So,
and
yeah,
I mean, I'm assuming from like a biz dev account management standpoint, right? If somebody came in with a feature and you guys were kind of like, it doesn't really make sense to add that to the module, like you would just develop a custom module, like an add-on sort of for that client.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's something we do frequently.
Awesome. So we've talked about a couple of the features of Mercury already, but I imagine there's a couple of others. What other key features would you say Mercury Editor has?
Yeah, so first and foremost, again, is that drag and drop interface. Well, and just backing up again, Mercury takes over the content creation, content edit screen. The edit form moves to the right and kind of an edit tray on the right. There's a live preview on the left. If you have layout paragraphs enabled, you are able to drag around the different components that are on the left-hand side. As you hover over content, you'll have plus buttons in all of the areas where you can add new components. You click the plus button, you get a component menu that shows all of the available components. All of those are essentially paragraph types, with a little bit of exception to that, but all of those are paragraph types. Mercury also provides mobile preview, which is pretty cool. So across the header, there are toggles for previewing in mobile mode. And then once you get into mobile mode, it changes the viewport side. There's a pull down where you can choose what mobile device you want to target. All of that's customizable in the Mercury editor settings section of the Drupal admin. Mercury also provides styles management using another module that we maintain called Style Options. Style Options, I don't know, maybe warrants someday its own episode. But Style Options provides a way for themers and developers to manage styles for it, right now in the module, styles for paragraphs and layouts in a centralized file. So if you've ever had the problem of like adding, say, a field to a paragraph that manages a particular style, let's just say background color, just to keep it simple, and you have like 30 paragraph types in your site, and then you have to go add that field to all 30 paragraph types. And then if you add a color to that background color field, you have to go add it to every one of those again. That gets quite unwieldy. And Style Options helps solve that by bringing it all into, one, the developer experience rather than the UI, and two, bringing it into a centralized file or collection of files to manage those styles. What that means in Mercury Editor is when you're editing a component, you click edit on the component, or you click plus, it gives the component menu, you choose a component type. You have tabs across the top of your component edit dialog. One of those tabs is styles. When you click the styles tab, any styles that have been configured to work with that component will show up there. So you can imagine sections that get extra padding, or maybe sections that go full screen or get special background treatment, or even like animation effects between sections as you scroll down a page. All of that can be managed as Style Options.
I have to say, as we're going throughout the show and talking about these things, I feel like the stuff you're working on is leading Drupal just slightly in core development for something like, because what you're talking about, I mean, there's additional flair here, but I'm hearing some of the features of single directory components, like the ability to define features and properties and things. And I'm just I'm looking forward to when all these things we've been talking about kind of land in core, and you can kind of leverage that and see what can truly be done. I mean, it's already impressive, but I'm curious if, yeah, maybe we should have a separate show on Style Options at some point.
Yeah, that's interesting, Nick. That's it. I mean, so we talked about, what are the risks of building on top of paragraphs, and maybe like another way to think about that is what are the risks, or even just the pros and cons of building in Contrib in the first place. And that is one nice thing about working Contrib, obviously, is the pace. You can just move a lot faster, and you can really focus on, I mean, we've really been able to focus on what are our needs, what are our users' needs, what's the UI that we want to create, and just, and make it as general purpose as we want it to be, as we need it to be, rather than the entire community and every Drupal site that exists. And I think that's, just one of the inherent challenges with core, and why we're pretty dedicated to working on all of these things in Contrib. It might be worth saying that we use single directory components also really extensively, and we use single directory components with Mercury. So all of our paragraph components just use, they pass their data to single directory components. And I think the adoption of single directory components, I think the creation of that module, and that's just been, I think that's been so awesome. It's really empowered at least our team to undergo kind of a separation of concerns like we never had before. So now, when we get done with the design system, front-end developers can move immediately into front-end development. And then the Storybook integration is great too. So we're creating components in Storybook, and we can do that separately from site building, and sort of at the end of the project, everything comes together in this kind of awesome moment. So that's, anyways, a few thoughts about some of that. And it's available, again, if you're using layout you can use it on any content type. If you download it and turn it on a content type where you're using layout paragraphs, that's where it'll really start to click.
Yeah, sounds like a very feature-rich editor. The features we just discussed are similar to some popular editors that are gaining popularity right now in community, like Gutenberg. What makes Mercury editor unique? What makes it stand out?
Yeah, so I think back to what we were talking about before, actually, what I should really start with is, honestly, the UI is just unlike anything I've seen in Drupal so far. So turning on Mercury, there's a few configuration steps when turning it on, a few things to kind of be aware of, that most of which are documented on the project page, some of which could use a little bit more documentation. Within just a few minutes, the UI that it provides for editing content is, again, just incredibly easy to use, a very clear representation of what you're working on, and really fundamentally unlike at least anything I've seen that's available now in Contrib or Core. There are some other really great approaches and tools for working with content, and for working with component-based content. You mentioned Gutenberg, DXPR, I know is another. There's a few of those out there. The big thing, I think one of the fundamental differences between Mercury and some of those other tools is that Mercury does not introduce its own new storage for content. Mercury really just provides a UI on top of existing, tested, long-standing, kind of elements of the approach to structured content that Drupal already has been using.
Justin,
and with that in mind,
just a question there, or maybe a point of clarification. So it's not adding kind of its own scripts and stuff to the experience, the content, right? But is it manipulating the code in any way that's specific to Mercury? Like, for example, some of those solutions you were talking about, I know once you install them, it's hard to uninstall them. Like, if you were to uninstall Mercury, I'm assuming it would just go back to paragraphs and layout paragraphs or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And it would go back to paragraphs and layout paragraphs. The front end content, what you see, what your end user see, will be completely unchanged if you uninstall Mercury. And that's one of the big design goals for that. So, and that's a big difference between some of those other systems. Some of those other systems, back to what you were talking about earlier on, Nick, they provide their own means of serializing, storing, and then re-rendering the content. And Mercury doesn't do any of that. Mercury is just providing a UI on top of existing APIs. So one of the big goals, and so far we've been able to maintain this, is that you can install and uninstall Mercury as you wish with no impact on your site's content or the way your content is rendered.
So I guess one of the questions, I mean, that's really exciting to me. I'm always wary of the type of modules. I mean, that's why in the early days, I was always wary about media, right? Installing media, because when media first came out, like once you installed it, you weren't removing it, period. And there were some use cases in the early days where it just didn't work for it. But so the ability to uninstall if you don't need it or it's not working out for some reason is helpful. Or if you release a new version or something is part of the upgrade process. But I'm curious about the stability of the content, and it sounds like this is a solved problem. But whenever you're interacting with the editorial experience, I'm always worried about a situation where an editor makes a lot of changes, and then something goes wrong, and they're unable to save it. I mean, that other than like the built-in Drupal ones, like somebody else edited the page in between, and now the content is locked. Like aside from that, does Mercury editor, because you're using some Ajax and some communication, does anything ever go wrong in your experience with the editorial experience, or do things like, does the preview not work and like all of a sudden it's like all over the place and you need to kind of resave or refresh or something, or is it kind of just work?
Yeah, great question. I mean, yes and no. I mean, this is part of the problem with building. I think this is an innate problem with building editorial experiences on top of complex data structures. Ultimately, a failed Ajax call can have unintended consequences, and it's hard to prevent that. So there's nothing happening in Mercury that guarantees that can't happen or that won't happen. There are also a few things that you would need to know as a front-end developer that might impact Mercury's ability to save content. And they're already best practices. So you have to, for example, you have to pass the attributes into the paragraph template or the single directory component. You have to pass the attributes array into those components so that Mercury, and this is actually a layout paragraph thing, but so that Mercury knows how to connect all of the controls to that paragraph. And you also need to make sure, sometimes it's easy to accidentally pass the components to both the wrapper and the inner paragraph or the inner template. So say your paragraph might render the attributes, and then maybe your single directory component, depending on how it's nested, also renders the components. That you'd run into trouble with that too. Now those are all, like, generally speaking, best practices to follow in Drupal anyways, but they definitely cause problems with layout paragraphs in Mercury Editor if you don't do that, or if you kind of fall into those mistakes or those pitfalls. Most of that is documented on the layout paragraphs project page and the Mercury Editor project page. The main one is just you have to render the attributes, or there are 2 or 3 attributes in particular that layout paragraphs needs to work.
Okay.
Otherwise, I mean, what's happening behind the scenes, it gets a little complicated when you're nesting paragraphs and trying to edit with Mercury, and we're doing some work right now to make that work better, but that piece gets a little more complicated, and I'm not sure, like that piece gets a little complicated, and it kind of poses some of the same questions to me as you're asking, Nick, like is there a chance for things to kind of get disconnected in the process here? But otherwise, it's pretty straightforward. I mean, the Ajax calls are saving the data back to something that's stored in temp store, and when you hit save, it saves it to the database. It's not that crazy, nothing that complicated.
So Nick, basically, I think the answer there is if you do dumb things, you get dumb results. So don't do dumb things.
Yeah, and always test. Yeah, test.
Actually, a follow-up question. I think we haven't covered it yet, but does it work with content moderation and different moderation states?
Oh yeah, great question, Anna. Yes, it does. And I don't even know if there's anything else to say there. Yeah, so the form, if you have content moderation enabled on the, you'll have your content, the content moderation field will show up on the edit form, on that tray that we've been talking about. And you can toggle through whatever, the same way you would if it was just the full screen edit form, you can change states to whatever states are available to you. And there's no like customizations there or anything. So it's not, it will follow whatever workflow, whatever transitions you have permitted per role or any customizations you've done there. They should just work.
No,
What
go ahead.
about right-hand sidebar? The fields that usually pop up there, like meta tags or rabbit hole settings, anything like that. Are they still available?
Yeah, they are. So the UI just changes a little bit for that edit tray. And what would usually be on that right-hand tray in the edit form is now at the bottom of the form. So at the top, you have kind of the main fields, and then at the bottom of the form, you have those meta, the kind of the meta data from the form. And where we'd like to see us go ultimately is that basically the only thing you're editing on the right-hand side is metadata. Metadata, workflow states, like you were just asking about, Anna. Where that's all you're really editing on that in the tray, and where we're working to get to is that all the other fields that you might have on your content are editable on that live preview. And we're not there yet, as we've been talking about, but that's where we'd like to get to. And then once, at that point, it will feel very similar to what editing is like today, except that instead of editing your blog content in a big text area in a form, you'll be editing it directly on the blog page.
Now, is there some kind of syncing between the preview and the edit form? So like, for example, let's say I am editing a page, I scroll all the way down and then click on something to edit. Does it like pull down to the component that I'm editing in the edit form as well, so that they're in sync? Or do I have to, like, if I need to change one of the styles or something, do I also have to scroll down on the right-hand side and kind of find the same component in both panes?
No, you would just do that in one or the other. And so the way Mercury works out of the box, it hides any layout paragraphs fields that are on your form. It takes them away entirely.
Oh.
And what's actually happening behind the scenes is it takes the layout paragraph field out of the form, and then it actually renders that builder on the preview. That's how the integration with layout paragraphs works. As we extend the live preview to work with more field types, I think what site builders will want to do is remove those fields from that form display. You really, there's no reason to give someone the option to edit the entity both on the right and left-hand side. That said, as you are editing that content, so say you're editing it in the live preview, as you're editing it, it's making AJAX calls and it's saving that object, saving that node to the temp store. Then when you go over to your form on the right-hand side and do any operations there, it first retrieves it from the temp store. No, you don't need to edit in both places, and in general, that should be like avoided.
Okay.
So we alluded to earlier that there's a roadmap for Mercury Editor for future improvements. I'm wondering what are some of the highlights on that roadmap?
Yeah, great question. So there's a lot of work that we have planned, a lot of work that we're doing. I mean, some of it we've already talked about, extending Mercury to work with other entity types, extending Mercury to work with other field types is something that's on our radar. But the things that we're focused on very next, first, it's really improving and solidifying the way inline text editing works. So right now, if you have a paragraph that has a rich text field, there's an issue for this on Drupal.org, but we are very close to having the functionality finished where you can just click on the field in the live preview, edit your text. It enables the editor. It uses all the editor settings from the field's form widget, and enables that editing right there on the live preview. That's kind of the major piece that we're working on right now. Another thing that's next on the roadmap is better governance controls. So there are APIs underlying most of what's happening with Mercury that make it possible for developers to limit what can be added in what context. So what component can be added to what region, what sections can be added to what node, etc. Creating a UI for that is something that we've been working on, and there are a couple of modules in the contrib space that do some of this already. That's just something we really want to bring some focus to and make a part of the Mercury editor ecosystem, is the ability to really easily say what can be added in what context. And then something else that we're working on that's a little further out, but something I'm still really excited about, is the idea of having a component library server. You can almost think of this as like, what's the module that was the D7 module that just, features. If you guys remember the features module from D7, which I think that features is still exists and is still used in some contexts, but a simpler version of features. Features provided the ability to, back before configuration management is when features was first created, and it provided the ability to export and import configuration. We'd like to see Mercury able to consume components from a component server, sync those into a website, and publish back to, with the correct permissions, publish back to a component server. We do a lot of work with organizations who, like universities are a great example, like a university who serves a bunch of internal clients, spins up internal customer websites. And we want those individual sites to be able to pull down the components they want from a centralized component server, and then customize those as they wish. So those are some of the things that we're working on. And then some of the other stuff we talked about already, again, just extending the experience to as many fields as possible.
I think that centralized component server is an interesting idea, because I see like not only, educational clients, but like organizational clients too, that have design systems. Like I almost envision the UX and design team being able to like create a component, put it into that server, and then like the whole organization can use that component if they need to. So like I see a lot of pluses to that feature.
I think single directory components, I think, also lend themselves to that too. I mean, after we had an episode on UI Suite, the UI suite of modules recently, and I actually opened an issue on Drupal.org that I need to circle back to, talking about like I envision a future where you can contribute single directory components and collections of single directory components on Drupal.org, and then you could then pull those into your projects as needed. I mean, the long-term dream for me is that you can also like use something like Project Browser to pull them in. And
so similarly to like a recipe, like the idea behind recipes.
Kind of like,
yeah.
So like imagine a world where like, hey, I create this paragraph with these 3 fields, and then I look for, let's say it's a card component, and then you look for existing single directory component card components on Drupal.org, pull it into your website, and then maybe pass in some variables in the UI. Like it, I mean, we're a ways away from that dream. I think there's a lot of things that have to fall into place, but having the ability to have a component library. I mean, I have clients working on component libraries. Like that would, like having something that integrates with that you can configure would be a huge benefit for those clients.
I mean, bringing all of those things together is like I think the goal, right? The design system, the component library, the editing experience, right? Like having those all kind of talking to each other is definitely very useful.
We end up redoing a lot of the same things too that a centralized library would help us stop doing. So I mean, so many sites use the same paragraph types. And a lot of that we handle in like a base distro, like kind of a starting point for development. But it would be, again, I think the next step for that is having a library, and a library with really smart management tools so that you can kind of optionally sync fields back into your, into client sites.
It's like a CDN for components.
Right.
Yeah, and a combination of like single directory components and UI Suite and Mercury Editor and recipes, as you mentioned, John. I think that's the magic sauce. It's just how do we glue those all together into a seamless experience? And a lot of them are experimental. They're not really in core or in contrib fully yet. So it's going to take some effort, but I'm looking forward to that. Well, one thing you mentioned that I'm curious about is you mentioned governance and the ability to restrict certain components to certain regions and things, and that's something that you have to kind of write. There's like APIs for that. When you're implementing Mercury editor for, I don't know, a moderately complex site like university, how much how much custom code are you writing to manage that type of experience? Like, are you spending tens of hours? Are you spending 50 hours, 100 hours? Like, if I'm looking to implement this for a client, obviously I can just turn it on. If I lay out paragraphs and all that stuff, it will kind of work. But if I want to build that experience, how much of an investment should I expect as a developer?
Yeah, good question. I mean, it varies pretty widely based on use case, obviously. For the governance piece specifically, there's a module that we created that we often use. I believe it's on Drupal.org. There's a few similar modules named very similar things. I believe this is layout paragraphs restrictions, plural. That provides a framework for, essentially creates a custom hook that one can implement in a custom module and just provide a list of basically a nested array that says these regions, these components can go inside of these regions. So, when we're doing that kind of governance and we're doing it at that level, when we're kind of programmatically saying what can go into what region, we use that module as the starting point, and then we create a custom module or use one of the custom modules in the site to implement that hook and provide those restrictions. That's pretty straightforward. The other way, and honestly, the way we more often handle those restrictions is not really layout and region specific. It's just on the content type itself, where you say what paragraph types are available to that content. That's where we more often do that kind of create those kinds of restrictions. Most of our clients, I mean, it's interesting. It's something that folks are concerned about when they're evaluating tools, and then somehow over the course of implementation become less concerned about specifying exactly what can go where. Maybe because also just like in some ways, like the bang for buck is elsewhere, if that makes sense. Editors can pretty quickly see like, oh, I shouldn't put this component in this region. That looks kind of bad. And the normal, kind of the natural editorial process helps with that. Like someone's editor says, whoa, that doesn't look quite right, things like that. But yeah, no, it's not. I mean, it's the editorial piece or the governance piece itself, especially if you use, there's a couple of those layout paragraph restriction modules that are out there. And if you use one of those, it's not very onerous to get that set up.
Okay. And I guess this is follow-up on follow-up. How accurate is the preview then? Because if you're putting a component that's not supposed to go in a region, is it kind of one-to-one? Does the preview look exactly like the site, or is it better than the current Drupal preview system but still not perfect? Like how closely does that mirror the live site?
Pretty much exactly. Yeah, I mean the preview is just it is the front end page rendered, and it's rendered with the layout paragraphs controls turned on. Sometimes, depending on how you have your layout paragraphs field styled, you might have a little extra padding or whatever you've applied to that layout paragraphs field. Or sometimes you don't, and you need it because you want a little bit of padding around your nested component within a section so that you can actually see what's going on, that kind of thing. But aside from like those somewhat trivial differences, it's really is kind of an exact representation of what the front end looks like.
Okay, so does paragraphs losing popularity keep you up at night? Are you concerned about paragraphs going away at all? And we talked about this a little bit earlier, but I'd like to pose the question directly.
No, not really. I mean, it's adoption on paragraphs is still, it's slowed down, but it's still growing. Everybody again who I've talked to has used it or is familiar with it. And once most of the folks that see Mercury, if they're interested in Mercury features, it's just a good it ends up becoming a good justification for using paragraphs if they weren't using paragraphs already. That's what we've seen so far. So that's not a huge worry. Again, the big thing that Mercury provides is this kind of paradigm shift of form on the right-hand side, live preview on the left. And if paragraphs somehow, I just don't see it happening. But if adoption started decreasing at a rate that was problematic for us, especially for us, we use Mercury for like our client projects. Adoption of Mercury right now, according to the Drupal.org, like the project page is quite low. It's like less than 200. At those numbers, it's going to be a long time before paragraphs and adoption of paragraphs has any impact on Mercury.
So are you looking for any community support? How can the community get involved and help pushing development forward?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that question. Yes, we absolutely are. So as I said before, for us, development is mostly driven by the needs of our clients. We're a consulting shop, a client services company, and like a lot of other agencies out there, that's what sponsors our development work. That said, as we've talked quite a bit about, Mercury Editor is a Drupal module. There is an issue queue. I'd welcome folks to get involved in the issue queue. Things there move a little bit more, maybe a little bit slower than some other contrib module spaces. Again, our efforts are mostly focused on the needs of clients, but that's still a fantastic way to get involved, is jump in the issue queue. Just like other Drupal modules.
Awesome. Well, Justin, as always, we appreciate you joining us to talk about Mercury Editor.
Yeah, thanks. It's been great to be here. That's something I'm super excited about, and it's been great to be back on the show, and love talking about Mercury Editor, something that we spent a lot of time working on.
Awesome. For our listeners, do you have any questions or feedback? You can reach out to Talking Drupal on Twitter with the handle Talking Drupal, or by email with show@talkingdrupal.com. You can connect with our hosts and other listeners on the Drupal Slack in the Talking Drupal channel.
You can promote your Drupal community events on Talking Drupal. Learn more at talkingdrupal.com/tdpromo.
And get the Talking Drupal newsletter to learn more about our guest hosts, show news, upcoming shows, and much more. You can sign up for the newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
And thank you, patrons, for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and choosing the Become a Patron button in the sidebar. Alrighty. Justin, if folks wanted to get a hold of you, talk about Mercury Editor, talk about Aten services, how could they go about doing that?
Yeah, definitely check out our website, my agency's website, aten.io, or atendesignGroup.com. Lots of ways, of course, to get in touch through that. I love talking about Mercury and love hearing from folks about it. Feel free to reach out to me directly at justin@aten.io. And otherwise, yeah, I think that's it.
Cool. Anna, what about you?
I think the best place is to contact me through either Drupal.org. My contact form is open and username is Amy Hylova. The same username is on Drupal Slack. So feel free to ping me there, although I'm not checking it as frequently. You can also contact me through the kalamuna.com website, and that's probably my three main streams of contact.
Perfect. Nick Laughlin.
You can find me pretty much everywhere at Nixvan, N-I-C-X-V-A-N.
And I'm John Picozzi. You can find me on all the major social networks and Drupal.org at John Picozzi. And you can find out more about EPAM at epam.com.
And if you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking. See you guys next week.
Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.